This shared responsibility makes violence seem less like individual cruelty and more like collective social obligation. When an entire community participates, questioning becomes harder because everyone's complicit. The survival lesson: mass participation in violence creates collective guilt that makes the system harder to oppose. When populations are recruited into executions, throwing stones, attending burnings, reporting suspects, they become stakeholders in the regime's brutality. Recognizing when you're being recruited into complicity helps you refuse participation before you become invested in defending actions you'd normally oppose. Number 7. Crucifixion. Ancient world through 4th century CE. We're putting this lower on the list, not because it's less brutal, but because it teaches different lessons than methods above it. Romans perfected crucifixion nails through wrists and feet. Victim left hanging for days, dying from combination of blood loss, shock, dehydration, suffocation as legs weakened and chest could no longer support breathing. Bodies left displayed as territorial markers. Crucifixion was designed for maximum visibility, prolonged suffering, and humiliation, reserved for slaves, rebels, enemies of state. The symbolic message: this is what happens to those who defy Rome. The method was so associated with shame that Roman citizens couldn't be crucified regardless of crime. Eventually abolished around 4th century CE, partly due to association with Jesus Christ's execution once Christianity became state religion. The execution method that killed its founder became theologically problematic. This reveals how religious shifts can eliminate punishments that military defeat or ethical arguments couldn't stop. The survival lesson: systematic violence often ends not through moral awakening, but through changing political or religious configurations that make previously acceptable practices newly awkward. Understanding what would make current brutal practices disadvantageous to authorities helps identify potential leverage points. Number 6. Seppuku Harakiri. Japan formalized 15th century. Outlawed 19th century. Last documented, case 1970. This is different from other entries because it was initially voluntary samurai ritual suicide to restore honor. But by 15th century, it became official punishment for samurai transgressions. The condemned would disembowel himself with short sword if still alive. Second person would decapitate to end suffering. Formally outlawed during Meiji Modernization 1868 to 1912 as Japan adopted Western legal systems. But it persisted culturally. General Nogi Moresuke committed seppuku in 1912. Author Yukio Mishima in 1970, protesting post-war Japan. This teaches that legal abolition doesn't eliminate cultural practices, especially those tied to concepts like honor, duty, or resistance. The survival lesson: cultural traditions can persist underground long after legal prohibition. When navigating societies with strong honor cultures, understand that official laws may not reflect actual pressures you'll face. Social death through dishonor can drive actions legal systems have supposedly eliminated. Number 5. Scaphism, the boats. Allegedly, ancient Persia. Victim trapped between two boats, force-fed milk and honey, covered with honey to attract insects, left to be eaten alive over days. Primary source: Plutarch, writing 400 years after alleged events based on second-hand accounts. Historical authenticity hotly disputed. No Persian records confirm it. But whether real or mythological, it reveals pattern. Some torture stories persist because they serve psychological purposes regardless of accuracy. The survival lesson, legendary tortures, achieve deterrence whether historically accurate or not. When evaluating threats, distinguish between documented practices and cautionary tales. Authorities benefit from you believing. Both create fear. But responding appropriately requires knowing which you're facing. Documented practices require concrete escape plans. Legendary threats might be psychological warfare. You can call their bluff on carefully. Number 4. Brazen Bull. Allegedly ancient Greece, 6th century BCE, hollow bronze bull that cooked victims alive while their screams supposedly sounded like bulls mooing. Story claims inventor Perillos was first victim when tyrant Phalaris tested it on him, but historians are skeptical, likely exaggerated or invented to illustrate tyrannical cruelty rather than describing actual device. Yet, the image persists through centuries as symbol of unchecked power. Survival lesson. Sometimes, horror stories tell you more about power dynamics than about actual practices. When examining historical torture claims, ask who benefits from this story. Tyrants benefit from populations believing they possess unimaginable cruelty. Dissidents benefit from portraying tyrants as monsters. Truth often lies between propaganda extremes. Number 3. Sawing in half. Rare but documented in Roman law. Early Christian martyr tales. Medieval justice systems. And isolated recent cases like Morocco, 1700s, victims sawed through lengthwise. Sometimes while hanging upside down to keep blood in brain longer. Method was so extreme it was rarely carried out. Threat alone usually sufficed. The psychological impact of such rare punishments was profound precisely because of their rarity. Survival lesson. Ultra-rare punishments function differently than routine ones. Their purpose isn't processing large numbers of criminals, but creating legendary deterrence through exceptional brutality. If you're threatened with such punishment, it might mean authorities are making example of you specifically, which creates different strategic calculations. The attention means more witnesses, more documentation, more international scrutiny factors that might provide leverage. Routine executions lack. Number 2. Elephant execution. India and Southeast Asia through 19th century. Trained elephants, killed, condemned by trampling. The method was both brutal and symbolic, demonstrating rulers' dominion over nature itself. Elephants could be trained to kill quickly or prolong suffering depending on rulers' wishes. European travelers in 17th, 18th centuries documented watching these executions, fascinated by spectacle. Colonial powers eventually outlawed it. The survival lesson. Executions incorporating impressive animals or natural forces are making statements about totality of power. When regimes demonstrate they control even nature's mightiest creatures. They're teaching that everything animals, elements, humans serves their authority. Recognizing this helps you understand when resistance appeals to natural law or natural rights will be futile because the regime has symbolically claimed dominion over nature itself. And finally, number 1, but not the method you'd expect. The most brutal execution isn't the most physically painful. It's Ling Chi. Death by 1,000 cuts. China from Tang Dynasty through 1905. Victim tied down. Flesh removed piece by piece over hours or days. The process was both torture and execution. Designed for maximum prolonged suffering. Reserved for most heinous crimes, treason, parricide, rebellion, Official executioners trained in precise cutting techniques to maximize pain while keeping victim alive and conscious. Some accounts claim actual counts rarely reached 1,000. The number was symbolic. Others document meticulous cutting, extending suffering over multiple days. But here's why Ling Chi tops this list. It wasn't just punishment, it was science. The Chinese legal system developed specialized expertise in prolonging death, trained professionals, standardized techniques, medical knowledge applied to maximize suffering. This represents the perfection of institutional cruelty systematized, professionalized, sustained for nearly 900 years. When Qing dynasty abolished it in 1905, this wasn't moral awakening, but modernization responding to Western pressure. The survival lesson. The most dangerous torture isn't the most painful, it's the most systematized. Professional torture sustained by institutions is far more threatening than individual sadism because it operates independently of any single person's cruelty or mercy. It's teachable, sustainable, scalable. Defeating it requires dismantling institutional infrastructure, not just removing cruel individuals. So, what patterns emerge from these 20 methods spanning 3,000 years? First, theological or ideological justification makes violence nearly impossible to stop through rational argument. When authorities claim divine mandate burning heretics, stoning blasphemers, or ideological necessity executing class enemies. Traitors. Appealing to ethics is futile. Second, elaborate, theatrical brutality reveals regime insecurity. Strong governments execute efficiently. Weak governments compensate for lack of legitimacy through spectacular violence drawing and quartering. Dismemberment by horses. Third, professional torture is more dangerous than chaotic violence. When execution methods become standardized with trained practitioners, Ling Chi, crucifixion, you're seeing systematization that survives regime changes. Fourth, legal frameworks can maintain archaic practices long after disuse. Poena Coulée through 1761. Drawing and quartering on books through 1870, sometimes threats persist decades past practice. Fifth, cultural traditions persist underground after legal prohibition. Seppuku outlawed 19th century, but continued through 1970. Sixth, legendary tortures serve purposes whether historically accurate or not. Brazen bull. Scaphism create deterrence regardless of actual use. Seventh, confined environments with no external accountability develop uniquely brutal punishments. Keel hauling persisted 300 years because naval authority operated without oversight. Eighth, punishments can backfire by delegitimizing regimes when spectacle overshadows lesson. Damien's dismemberment shocked crowds into sympathy, contributing to French move toward humane guillotine. Ninth, strategic death can accomplish more than tactical cooperation. Giles Corey's refusal protected family and delegitimized Salem authorities. 10th, documented brutality creates evidence against perpetrators. Assyrian palace inscriptions. Inquisition records. Nazi documentation. When authorities record violence, they create testimony condemning them. 11th, mass participation creates collective guilt-making systems harder to oppose. Stoning involves entire community in execution, making everyone stakeholder in regime's brutality. 12th, geographic and cultural lag means contemporary standards aren't uniform. Spain's garrote through 1974 shows barbaric practices can persist in modernizing societies. 13th, Punishments targeting symbolic significance reveal what authorities fear most. Methods attacking specific body parts, tongue cutting for speakers. Blinding spies. Castrating adulterers show where they perceive threats. 14th, ultra-rare punishments function through exceptional brutality rather than routine processing. Sawing in half, almost never used but created legendary deterrence. 15th, legal loopholes can weaponize procedures originally designed for other purposes, pressing technically coercion, not punishment, but distinction meaningless when it kills you. 16th, psychological torture, destroying will, is often more effective than physical pain. Immurement's isolation and helplessness break spirit more thoroughly than breaking bones. 17th, economic factors often drive abolition more than moral awakening. Boiling lasted only 16 years, partly because it was resource-intensive and shocked crowds rather than satisfying them. 18th, religious shifts can eliminate punishments that ethical arguments couldn't stop. Crucifixion abolished partly due to Christianity becoming state religion. 19th, modernity doesn't guarantee humane treatment. Breaking wheel persisted into 1841 industrial Prussia. Finally, the most dangerous torture is the most systematized. Lingqi's 900-year professional practice shows institutional cruelty is more threatening than individual sadism. These aren't just historical curiosities. They're pattern recognition training for identifying when contemporary systems employ similar mechanisms. The specific tools changed. We don't use breaking wheels or brazen bulls anymore, but underlying logic persists, using violence to control populations. Creating public spectacles that teach submission, developing legal frameworks, legitimizing brutality, professionalizing torture to make it sustainable, recruiting populations into complicity through mass participation, maintaining archaic practices through cultural lag, preserving legendary threats for deterrence, weaponizing legal procedures, documenting brutality while claiming propriety. Subscribe to Medieval Survival Skills, because understanding how institutional torture operates across centuries trains you to recognize when authority structures are employing violence as systematic social control. Giles Corey's More Weight teaches that sometimes refusing cooperation while enduring maximum suffering accomplishes more than submission because it exposes regime brutality in ways that shock even supporters. Henry VIII's Boiling Law teaches that punishments can become so horrific they lose legitimacy, backfiring against regimes. Lingqi teaches that professional systematized torture is more dangerous than chaotic violence because it operates independently of individual psychology. Medieval survival required recognizing when violence was being systematized, when execution methods were being professionalized with trained practitioners, when legal procedures were weaponized through loopholes, when public spectacles recruited populations into complicity. The farmers watching Giles Corey pressed learned two contradictory lessons: refuse cooperation and die horribly. But also, even at 81 with chest exploding, humans can refuse to break. That second lesson is what authorities didn't want taught. That's why his execution backfired. It demonstrated regime brutality while revealing human capacity to withstand it. The crowds watching Damien's torn apart by horses learned similar dual lesson: defy the king and face unimaginable suffering. But also, this is so brutal, even we who support the monarchy feel sick watching it. The survival wisdom from these 20 methods: first, prevention beats endurance. Avoid accusations entirely rather than hoping to survive torture. Second, understand legal procedures can be weaponized through loopholes that make technical distinctions, pressing as coercion, not punishment, meaningless, Third, recognize theatrical brutality as regime weakness. You might exploit elaborate cruelty, often backfires. Fourth, distinguish real threats from legendary deterrents. Both create fear, but require different responses. Fifth, build resistance strategies appropriate to whether you're facing routine processing or exceptional example making. Sixth, understand that professional torture requires professional opposition, dismantling institutions, not just removing individuals. Seventh, refuse complicity when recruited into mass participation. Eighth, document everything because recorded atrocities eventually condemn perpetrators. Ninth, recognize that sometimes strategic death accomplishes more than cooperation. 10th, understand modern environments can harbor archaic brutality through cultural lag. These 20 prisoners and countless others, those pressed, burned, broken, boiled, impaled, trampled, flayed, dismembered, immured, suffered, not just physically, but symbolically. They became warnings, lessons, territorial markers, demonstrations of power. But in being transformed into symbols, they also became evidence. Evidence that regimes requiring such elaborate brutality to maintain control are fracturing. Evidence that even under worse torture, humans can refuse cooperation. Evidence that institutional violence, when documented and made public, eventually undermines those who deploy it. The detailed records authorities kept to demonstrate legal propriety now condemn them. The public spectacles designed to teach submission also revealed regime brutality in ways that eventually shocked supporters. This is the paradox of systematic torture. It requires publicity for deterrence purposes. But publicity creates witnesses whose testimony survives long after regimes fall. The executioners who added stones to Corey, the crowds who watched Damien's torn apart, the scribes who documented Lingchi procedures, the guards who operated breaking wheels, all created records that now testify against systems they served. Subscribe to Medieval Survival Skills because learning to read these historical testimonies trains you to recognize when contemporary systems are following similar scripts. The tools changed, pressing became enhanced interrogation. Breaking wheels became stress positions. Keel hauling became waterboarding. Burning became targeted drone strikes. Crucifixion became indefinite detention. The underlying mechanisms using violence for social control, creating legal frameworks that legitimize brutality, professionalizing torture, recruiting populations into complicity, maintaining practices through institutional inertia remain remarkably consistent. Understanding how institutional violence operates, how it's justified, systematized, professionalized, documented, and eventually undermined is survival knowledge applicable whenever authority claims the right to inflict suffering in the name of justice, security, or social order. Remember their stories. Giles Corey demanding more weight. Damien's torn apart so brutally, crowds felt sympathy. Richard Roos boiled for poisoning porridge. The unnamed thousands subjected to Lingchi over 900 years. Learn their lessons. Recognize the patterns. And understand that the distance between civilization and the torture chamber is measured not in centuries, but in the number of justifications we're willing to accept for violence against those we've been taught to view as threats. Those who forget how torture operates are condemned to potentially experience it. Those who study these systems gain knowledge that remains relevant across eras. The survival strategies that worked in medieval England and ancient Rome still work today. Learn them, remember them, and may you never need to apply them. But if you do know the patterns, recognize the signs, and survive,